Akua Susuka and her husband Obed Okoto once lived a humble but loving life in Oda with their children Richard and Mary. Poverty pushed Obed to leave for Accra to hustle, promising to return soon. In the city, he washed cars by day and worked as a night security guard. Everything changed when he met Madame Akua, a wealthy, kind woman whose car he often washed. Wanting her affection, Obed lied that he was single. Their friendship grew into love. He later told Akua he was going to Nigeria for a better job, then faked his death. A month later, Akua received news of a fatal car accident with his name among the dead. She buried an empty coffin, weeping over ashes that weren't his. Years passed. Akua struggled alone to raise the children, working under the sun, falling sick, yet never giving up. Richard grew up and moved to Accra for work, finding a waiter's job at a small restaurant. Meanwhile, Obed lived in comfort with Madame Akua, who made him rich and married him after he lied that he had no family. One evening, fate turned. Akua, too tired to cook, stopped at a restaurant, and there she saw Richard. His face mirrored Obed's perfectly. Shocked, she called him to her table and asked softly, "What is your name?" "Richard, madam," he replied. Her world froze. The truth was returning. Stay tuned as the final episode unfolds every secret and every heartbreak. Madame Akua sat quietly at the restaurant table, her spoon untouched. The name Richard kept echoing in her head like a distant drumbeat. When the young waiter returned with her drink, she couldn't help herself. She needed to know more. "Richard," she called softly. He turned politely. "Yes, madam? Please don't mind my curiosity," she said with a faint smile. "You look so much like someone I know. Tell me, is your father home?" Richard froze for a second. The question cut deep into a wound he thought had long healed. He forced a weak smile and said, "My father died many years ago, madam. In a car accident in Nigeria. I never saw his body. We buried an empty coffin." Akua blinked slowly, her hand trembling slightly. For a moment, she felt her heart stop. A car accident. In Nigeria. The words stabbed her like cold steel, but then she shook her head, convincing herself it was only coincidence. "Oh, I see," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, my dear. Life can be cruel sometimes." Richard nodded respectfully. "Yes, madam, but my mother is strong. She raised us alone. I thank God for her every day." Akua managed a faint smile and handed him a small tip before leaving. But her mind wasn't at peace. As she drove home through the noisy streets of Accra, the image of Richard's face haunted her. The resemblance to her husband was too striking. The same eyes, the same smile, even the same way he folded his arms when standing still. When she reached home, Obed was sitting on the sofa, reading through some papers. She stood at the doorway, studying him silently, her heart battling between curiosity and fear. He looked up and smiled. "You're back early today. How was your day?" Akua hesitated before replying. "It was fine. Just long. I stopped by a restaurant for food since I came home late." Obed nodded, returning to his papers, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. For a few seconds, Akua considered asking, "Do you have a son named Richard?" But the thought made her chest tighten. It sounded ridiculous. She trusted her husband completely. Why plant suspicion where there might be none? She brushed it off with a sigh. Humans resemble each other, she told herself. Maybe it was just coincidence. That night, she lay beside Obed in silence, listening to his steady breathing. But deep inside, something uneasy lingered. A whisper she couldn't silence. Something about that boy's eyes, that name, that story of a father lost in Nigeria. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, fate began to stir again. quietly weaving the strings that would soon pull all of them together. Days passed, then weeks. Yet Madame Akua couldn't erase Richard's face from her mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw that same gentle expression, the warmth in his eyes, the quiet dignity that reminded her so much of Obed. She told herself it was mere coincidence, but something inside her pulled her back to that restaurant again and again. At first, she came to buy food. Then she began to visit, even when she wasn't hungry. She would sit at her favorite corner, smiling softly whenever Richard walked by. "Madam, you're here again today," Richard would say shyly. "Yes," she laughed lightly. "Maybe your food tastes better than any other place in Accra." Her kindness touched him. In her presence he felt something he hadn't known for a long time, motherly warmth. She asked about his mother, his sister, his dreams. Richard, trusting her sincerity, told her everything. How his father died in a car accident in Nigeria, how his mother struggled to raise them, how he worked to support them now. Akua listened in silence, her heart tightening. Each word reminded her of a hidden pain she had carried for years, a pain she had never shared with anyone. One afternoon, after lunch, she looked at him seriously and said, "Richard, do you know you look exactly like my husband? So much that sometimes when I see you, I feel as if I'm looking at his younger self." Richard smiled, a little embarrassed. "People say I resemble many people, madam. Maybe it's just coincidence." But Akua shook her head slowly. "No, my son. It's more than that. The resemblance is deep, not just in your face, but in your spirit. You remind me of him in ways I can't explain." She paused, her eyes softening. "I hope you don't mind if I take you like my own son. You are respectful, humble, and hard-working, qualities I admire." Richard was touched. He bowed his head. "Madam, that would be an honor. You remind me of my mother, kind and strong." A tear rolled down Akua's cheek before she could stop it. "Richard," she whispered, "there's something I've never told anyone. I lost my womb years ago after I escaped an abusive marriage. The man I loved before my husband, he nearly destroyed me. I couldn't have children after that. When I finally met my current husband, he accepted me with my scars. But deep down, I've always wished to have a son. Someone just like you." Her voice cracked. Richard, though shocked, felt deep compassion. "Madam, I'm so sorry. You don't deserve that kind of pain." She smiled sadly. "Life teaches us in strange ways, my boy. Maybe God sent you so that my empty heart would remember how it feels to love again." Richard nodded quietly, not knowing that her words would soon unlock a truth neither of them was ready to face. That evening, after Madame Akua left the restaurant, Richard sat quietly outside on a wooden bench. The night breeze was cool, but his mind was restless. This woman had been visiting almost every day for weeks, always speaking to him with kindness, always bringing gifts or offering advice. It warmed his heart, but something about her sadness lingered in his thoughts. When he finally got a chance, he pulled out his small phone and called his mother back in Oda. Her tired but gentle voice answered after a few rings. "Hello, my son." "Ma," Richard said with a smile, "there's a woman who has been visiting the restaurant often. She's very kind. She says I look exactly like her husband, and she's treating me like her own son. She even told me she can't have children, but she feels peace when she talks to me." Akua listened in silence, her heart softening. My son, life is full of wonders. If she treats you well, then be a good son to her. Maybe God is using you to bring her comfort. Respect her and never take her kindness for granted." "I will, Ma," Richard promised. "She reminds me of you, gentle but strong." They spoke a little longer, laughing softly before saying goodnight. But miles away, Destiny was tightening its net around them all. 3 days later, Madame Akua visited the restaurant again. That afternoon, she wore a simple dress, her face calm but curious. After a warm conversation, she asked gently, "Richard, you've never told me where you come from. Which town were you born in?" Without hesitation, Richard replied, "Akimoda, madam. That's where my mother and sister still live." The moment the name left his lips, Akua froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "Akimoda?" she repeated slowly. "Yes, madam," he said, smiling proudly. "My late father was from there too. He went to Accra years ago and died in Nigeria after a car accident. We buried an empty coffin." Akua felt her stomach twist. The words slammed into her chest like thunder. Her husband, Obed, had once told her he came from Akimoda. She remembered clearly how he spoke bitterly of his so-called cruel relatives. She forced a weak smile to hide her shock. "Oh, Oda is a nice place," she murmured, then excused herself quickly and left the restaurant, her heart pounding. That night, when she reached home, Obed was sitting in the living room watching the news. She stood in front of him, her eyes burning with suspicion. "Obed," she said quietly, "we've been married for years, and yet you've never taken me to your hometown. Every time I ask, you find an excuse. Tonight, I want to know the truth. Why?" Obed shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Akua, I told you before, my family and I are not close. I cut ties long ago. There's nothing there for me." But his words no longer convinced her. Something inside her told her he was hiding something deep. "I'm your wife," she said firmly, tears brimming in her eyes. "If you love me, you'll tell me the truth. Tomorrow, we're going to Oda. I want to meet the people who raised the man I married." Obed's heart stopped. Sweat gathered on his forehead. The past he thought was buried was crawling back to life. Obed grew restless after that night's confrontation. For the first time since his fake death, fear crept back into his bones. Madame Akua's voice had trembled with something he had never heard before: suspicion. The next morning, she brought up the topic again over breakfast. "Obed, you never talk about your past. Don't you miss your people at all?" He slammed his cup gently onto the table, avoiding her eyes. "Akua, please. I told you already, I have no family worth seeing. They treated me like a stranger, even when I was young. Those people are dead to me." His tone was firm, but his eyes betrayed unease. Akua watched him silently. She knew he was hiding something. The way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his tea told her his heart wasn't as calm as his words. "All right," she said softly, pretending to accept it. "I won't ask again." But she didn't believe him anymore. 2 days later, unable to shake the strange feeling inside her, Madame Akua drove quietly to the restaurant again. Richard was busy serving customers when she arrived, but his face lit up when he saw her. "Madam, you're here again," he said warmly. "You've become one of our most loyal customers." Akua smiled faintly and sat at her usual table. When he brought her food, she waited until he sat down for a short break before speaking. "Richard, my son," she began, her voice calm but curious. "You mentioned last time that your family is in Oda, right?" "Yes, madam," Richard replied. "My mother and younger sister are there. I try to send them money when I can." She nodded slowly, studying his face. "Have you visited them recently?" Richard smiled shyly. "Not for a while, madam. Work is hard, and I've been saving to go next weekend. My mother keeps saying she misses me." Akua hesitated for a long moment before leaning slightly forward. "Richard, would you mind if I came along when you go? I would love to visit your hometown, maybe meet your mother and thank her for raising such a respectful young man. And..." She paused. "I'd also like to ask if she'd allow you to stay closer to me. You're like a son to me now." Her words were kind, but her heart raced. Something inside her urged her to go, to see where this boy came from, to confirm the doubts that haunted her nights. Richard's face lit up. "Madam, that would be an honor. My mother would be happy to meet you. You've done so much for me already. Let's go next weekend when I get 2 days off." Akua smiled, but deep in her chest, unease twisted like a storm. She felt both excitement and fear. Excitement to meet the family of a boy she cherished, and fear of what she might discover. That night, as she drove home, she looked at her husband beside her on the couch, pretending to read. Something about his calmness felt like a mask now. The walls between them were cracking, and she could already see the truth shining faintly through. That morning, Madame Akua pulled up at the restaurant in her black SUV. When Richard saw her step out, he ran to greet her. "Good morning, madam," he said cheerfully. "Good morning, my son," she smiled. "Are you ready for our little trip?" "Yes, madam. My mother will be so happy to meet you." They set off, the city fading behind them as they drove toward the quiet greenery of the eastern region. The road to Oda was long and winding, but the conversation between them was soft and pleasant. Madame Akua asked about his childhood, his school, his late father. Each answer stabbed at her chest a little more, but she hid her discomfort behind calm smiles. When Richard spoke about his father, how he left Oda to hustle in Accra and later died in Nigeria, Akua felt her fingers tighten around the steering wheel. The air in the car grew heavy. "I'm sorry, my dear," she whispered. "You've been through a lot." Richard nodded, staring out the window. "It's my mother who suffered the most. She's everything to us." After hours on the road, they arrived in Akim Oda. The smell of cocoa leaves and red dust filled the air. Richard's heart beat fast as they entered the familiar town. Children played by the roadside, and the small houses stood quietly beneath the sun. "Madam, that's our house," he said, pointing to a humble clay building with a mango tree beside it. Akua parked the car slowly. Her chest tightened when she saw a woman sitting in front of the house, peeling plantains. Even from afar, she could see years of struggle etched into her face. "Ma!" Richard called, jumping out of the car. Akua looked up in shock, her eyes wide, then bright with joy. "Richard! My son!" she cried, running to hug him. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she held him tightly, touching his face as if to confirm he was real. When she noticed the elegant woman stepping out of the car, she quickly wiped her tears and bowed slightly. "Good afternoon, madam." "You're welcome." "Good afternoon, my dear," Akua replied warmly. "You have raised a good son." Akua smiled shyly. "It's God who has helped us, madam." They sat under the mango tree, talking. Akua's eyes studied every corner, the yard, the faces, the simplicity of their life. Her heart ached, not from pity, but from something deeper. When she asked about Akua's husband, Akua sighed. "He died years ago in Nigeria. We never found his body. It still hurts, but I believe he rests in peace." Akua's heart skipped. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked around. A framed picture of a man sat on a small wooden table inside the room. From where she sat, she could barely see the face, but something about it felt hauntingly familiar. Madame Akua could barely breathe. Her eyes drifted once more to the picture frame inside Akua's small room. The photo sat proudly on a wooden stool, the smiling face of a man she knew better than anyone, the same face she slept beside every night. Her hands began to tremble, her lips went dry. For a moment she thought her eyes were deceiving her, but when she leaned closer, the truth hit her like lightning. The man in the picture was Obed, her husband. Her heart pounded wildly. Sweat broke out on her forehead despite the cool evening air. For a long moment she sat frozen, staring at the photograph in disbelief. She whispered under her breath, "No, no, this cannot be real." Akua, unaware of the storm raging inside her guest, smiled gently. "Madam, please, let me bring you water to drink." But Akua shook her head quickly, pulling out her phone with shaky hands. Her fingers scrolled through her gallery until she found a picture she had taken with Obed, smiling together on their wedding day, their faces full of love and pride. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "My dear, please, I beg you, come here. Is this man familiar to you?" Akua leaned forward to look at the screen. The instant her eyes met the image, the bowl of plantain peels slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. She covered her mouth with both palms as tears rushed down her face. That's my husband," she whispered. "That's Obed, my husband who died in a car accident. No, it can't be. Are you saying he's alive? Or am I looking at a ghost?" Mary, who had been inside, ran out when she heard her mother's cry. "Ma, what's happening?" Richard stood there, frozen, staring at the phone in Madame Akua's trembling hand. His throat tightened as confusion washed over him. "Madam, where did you take this picture?" Akua demanded through sobs. "That's my husband. He left for Accra years ago and never came back. We buried an empty coffin for him." Akua's voice broke. "No, that's my husband too. We've been married for years. He told me his family abandoned him. He said he had no one left." Richard's head spun, his voice cracked. "Are you saying my father is alive?" Mary began crying loudly, clinging to her mother. The small compound filled with confusion and fear. Some neighbors gathered around, whispering, "Hey, what's happening? Who is the woman?" Akua fell to her knees, trembling. "So he lied to me. He lied to all of us. Oh God, why? Why would he do this to us?" Madame Akua, panicking, stood up quickly. "We must go to your family elders. This is too heavy. I don't know if I'm living with a man or a ghost." The crowd watched as Akua, and Richard made their way to the family compound that night, their hearts heavy with fear, anger, and disbelief. The truth was no longer hidden. It had exploded into the open like a wound ripped wide. At the family house, the elders sat on wooden stools arranged in a circle. Palm lanterns flickered around them, casting trembling shadows on their wrinkled faces. Madame Akua sat quietly beside Akua, her head bowed, while Richard and Mary clung to their mother's side. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with shock, betrayal, and fear. The head elder, Nana Kwabena, cleared his throat. His deep voice carried authority. "My daughters," he began, "we have all heard pieces of what has happened, but tonight we must hear everything clearly. Madame Akua, tell us your story." Akua took a shaky breath and began. "Years ago, I met Obed at a washing bay in Accra. He was humble, hard-working, and respectful. I didn't know much about his past. He told me he had no family, that they mistreated him when he was young, so he cut ties. I pitied him." Her voice trembled as tears filled her eyes. "He became like family to me. I helped him. I made him the manager of one of my warehouses. Years later, we got married in court. He said his family was dead. I believed him, because he spoke of them with pain. I never thought I was marrying another woman's husband." The crowd gasped softly. Akua's body shook with quiet sobs, her hand pressed against her chest. "He lied to both of us," she whispered. "He left me and the children with nothing. For years we believed he was dead. We buried him in tears." Nana Kwabena looked around, his face stern. This matter is deep. This is not something words alone can solve. A man cannot die in one world and live in another. Another elder leaned forward. Perhaps he is truly a ghost. Maybe Madame Akua has been living with a spirit all these years. The thought sent chills through everyone. Madame Akua's eyes widened in fear. No, he is real. He eats, he laughs, he breathes like any man. But if he truly is this same Obed Akoto, then I must face him and hear the truth from his mouth. The elders murmured among themselves before the head elder finally raised his hand for silence. Then it is decided, he declared. Tomorrow we will travel to Accra with Madame Akua, and the children. We must see this man with our own eyes. If he is alive, let him speak for himself. If he is a ghost, then the gods will show us. The gathering ended with heavy hearts. Akua held Richard and Mary close as they wept silently. Madame Akua sat quietly beside them, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. That night, no one slept in Oda. The truth was waiting in Accra, and by the next sunrise, it would change every life forever. The next morning in Oda was filled with tension and silence. The roosters crowed, the wind whispered through the trees, but in Akua's compound, no one spoke much. Madame Akua barely touched her food. Her hands shook each time she held her cup. Akua's eyes were red from crying all night, and Richard kept pacing back and forth, his chest tight with anger and confusion. Before dawn fully broke, two family elders arrived, Nana Kwabena and his assistant, old Kwaku Enti. They were both dressed in traditional cloth, their faces solemn. "Let's go," Nana Kwabena said. "The gods will not forgive us if we leave this matter in the dark." They set off in Madame Akua's car, she at the wheel, Akua and the children in the back seat, and the elders quietly murmuring prayers. The journey to Accra was long and heavy. No one spoke much. Only the sound of the car engine and the rhythmic thump of Akua's restless fingers tapping her thigh filled the silence. Akua's mind raced the entire trip. What if Obed denies everything? What if he runs away? Then again, what if she had indeed been living with a ghost all these years? Her heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. After several hours, they arrived at Akua's residence, a large, elegant house with tall iron gates and a manicured lawn. As the car rolled into the compound, Akua's eyes widened. She could not believe her husband had been living in such wealth while she and her children suffered in poverty. Her lips quivered, and tears began to flow quietly down her cheeks. Richard clenched his fists, his jaw tight with rage. "So this is where he's been hiding, while we starved," he muttered. Madame Akua parked the car and turned to them, her voice trembling. "Please, stay calm. No matter what happens, let's hear him out first." The elders nodded. "The truth cannot hide forever," Nana Kwabena said firmly. Akua led them to the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle for a moment before she knocked. Inside, Obed's voice echoed from the living room. "Akua, you're back early." When he opened the door, his cheerful expression froze instantly. His eyes darted from his wife to the group behind her, and then landed on Akua, standing in her old black dress, her face pale as ashes. For a moment the world seemed to stop. "Obed," Akua whispered, her voice trembling. "You're alive." He stepped back slowly, his mouth opening but no words coming out. His face drained of color. Richard's breathing quickened, and Mary began to cry softly, clutching her mother's skirt. Madame Akua's voice broke the silence. "Obed, tell us the truth. Who are you really? Are you a man or a ghost?" The elders stepped forward, their presence heavy and commanding. "Obed Akoto," Nana Kwabena said, "today you must speak. The living and the dead are waiting for your answer." Obed's lips trembled, his body shook as guilt, fear, and shame crushed him all at once. For a long moment, Obed stood motionless at the doorway, as if his shadow had been caught between two worlds, the one he built with lies and the one he abandoned with betrayal. His heart raced wildly, his knees weak. The eyes staring at him, Akua's, Richard's, Mary's, and Madame Efua's, were not just eyes, they were mirrors reflecting the monster he had become. "Obed!" Nana Kwabena's voice thundered again. "Speak! These women are not strangers. They are bound to you by truth and deceit. You owe them words before the gods strike you down." Obed swallowed hard. His mouth felt dry, his tongue heavy. "Please," he whispered, "come inside." They followed him into the large sitting room, bright and beautiful, yet filled now with an air so tense it could break. Akua looked around in disbelief. The furniture gleamed, the air smelled of imported perfume, and everything screamed of a life she could never imagine. Her chest tightened. This was where he lived while we suffered. They all sat. Silence stretched painfully. Then Obed began, his voice low, trembling. "I am not a ghost. I am a coward." He bowed his head. "Years ago when I left Oda, I swore to come back a better man. But life in Accra broke me. I struggled. I was hungry, lost, desperate. Then Madame Efua came into my life. She was kind, generous. She saw good in me when I saw nothing but failure." He took a deep breath. "When she asked about my family, I lied. I said I was single. I said my family treated me badly. I didn't want her to see me as a poor man with burdens. I thought it was a harmless lie, but it became a chain around my neck." Akua's voice trembled. "So you pretended to die? You let me bury an empty coffin and raise your children alone?" Obed looked at her with tears streaming down his face. "I wanted to come back, Akua, but the lie had grown too big. When Efua started asking about my family, I panicked. So I planned everything. The phone call, the fake accident, everything. I thought if you believed I was gone, you would move on. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Richard slammed his fist against the chair. "Do you know what you did to us? Do you know how Ma cried every night? Do you know what hunger felt like?" Obed's voice broke. "I know, and I will never forgive myself." Madame Efua sat still, her hands trembling. "So, I've been living with a man who buried his own past to marry me?" Her tears fell freely. "You called me your wife, Obed. You prayed with me, laughed with me, and yet everything was built on lies." He knelt before both women. "Efua, Akua, I destroyed both of you. I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, I beg for mercy." The elders looked on, silent and heavy-hearted. Nana Kwabena finally spoke. "You have broken sacred vows, Obed Akoto. The earth itself will judge you. The women you wronged will decide your fate." The room fell silent again. Everyone's heart was shattered, but the truth had finally spoken. The elders sat in deep silence, their faces solemn and heavy with disappointment. The truth had torn open wounds no words could heal. Akua's quiet sobs filled the room, while Madame Efua sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest, her heart pounding between anger and disbelief. After a long pause, Nana Kwabena spoke firmly. "Obed Akoto," he said, "you have dishonored your ancestors and broken the sacred vows of marriage. You faked death, betrayed your wife, abandoned your children, and deceived another woman. The gods do not bless men who destroy homes with lies." He turned to the women. "It is not our place to punish him with hands, but with truth. Each of you must choose what to do with him. Speak your hearts." Madame Efua stood up slowly, her eyes red but steady. "I will not curse him," she said, "but I cannot share a house with a man who buried his family alive. He lied to me, took my kindness for weakness, and made me part of his sin. From today, Obed, we are no longer husband and wife." She turned toward the door, her tears falling freely. "Pack your things. Leave my house. The wealth you enjoyed was not yours. It was mercy you abused." Obed bowed his head, too ashamed to speak. Akua rose next, her voice trembling. "You buried me in pain, Obed. You left me to raise our children alone, believing you were dead. I suffered, but I endured. Now you come back seeking forgiveness, but I have no heart left to give. I forgive you as a Christian, but not as a wife. My love for you died the day we buried that empty coffin." Richard stood beside his mother, his face unreadable. He looked at his father with quiet disappointment. "You lost your place in my heart long ago," he said softly. "You are my father by blood, but not by deed." Mary said nothing. She only wiped her tears and turned her face away. The elders nodded gravely. "The decision is made," Nana Kwabena declared. "Obed Akoto, you are banished from both homes until the gods themselves show mercy upon you." That evening, Madame Efua packed Obed's belongings into a small bag. Without another word, she watched him walk out of her compound and disappear into the dark. Days later, she met privately with Richard. "Your father's actions brought pain," she said gently, "but you must not let his darkness swallow your light. I will help you, my son. I will support your dreams, for your mother raised you well." And she kept her word. With Madame Efua's support, Richard went to school, worked hard, and became an administrator in a reputable institution. Mary followed her mother's determination and joined the customs service, her uniform a symbol of discipline and honor. As for Obed, he returned to Oda, begging his family for forgiveness. The elders listened, but Akua could never bring herself to welcome him back. She had moved on, not into another marriage, but into peace. Obed spent his last days alone, living quietly in the village, haunted by the laughter of the family he destroyed. Years later, Richard visited his father's small hut. The old man was frail, his eyes hollow. "Son," he whispered weakly, "forgive me." Richard sighed deeply. "I forgave you long ago, father, but I could never forget." He placed some food beside him and walked away without looking back. Obed wept quietly, whispering into the empty room, "Akua, I'm sorry." And that was how the story of Obed Akoto, the man who buried love with lies, came to an end. Lessons for our viewers. Men who run away from responsibility may escape for a season, but the truth always finds them. A lie can buy comfort, but it cannot buy peace. When you abandon your home, you abandon your own reflection. To every woman who stands firm, who sacrifices her strength and youth for her children, may God bless your tears and turn your pain into power. Like Akua, may your endurance bear fruit. To the youth, never repay betrayal with bitterness. Let your success be your loudest answer. Thank you for watching this emotional story on Ananse Web of Tales. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating African stories of truth, betrayal, love, and redemption. And please, share with us in the comments where you're watching from, your country, your town, your village. Your story matters too. This has been Akua Susuka and Obed Okoto, a tale of love, deceit, and divine justice.